This is TWiT.
You know, I swore that before this show I would sit down and watch all 6 hours of testimony, and I just couldn't bring myself to do it. But I'm sure you all did, with a fine-tooth comb. So what are the takeaways?
My takeaway...
Anybody?
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Go ahead. You start.
No, I was just going to say, my takeaway is that they gathered an extraordinary bit of evidence. Leo, if you ran TWiT and had as little information as these CEOs seem to have about Amazon,
I don't know anything about
Google,
that. Well, I don't
right?
know.
I mean,
that would, if we did that, that would be wrong. Right. But I can't promise we didn't do that.
What's happening here?
Yeah.
No, it really seemed to be them repeatedly. This was the pattern. The government would be talking about some emails that would have them dead to rights on some anti-competitive behavior, something that was just completely indefensible. And they'd be like, oh, gosh, I just don't know anything about that. I think what we were trying to say is we're trying to empower users. And they just kept trying to flip it around. Like the other part of it that was so stunning is all four of them really kept talking about their companies like they're these nimble, humble upstarts that just may have made a few mistakes. And it's like, y'all just beat the market repeatedly because you're all effectively monopolies or duopolies. Like, you're not this nimble, like garage run company anymore. You're real entities. And I just, I really thought Congress did a pretty good job, all the grandstanding, put aside.
And it's the staff as much as anything else. I mean, they clearly did a lot of document. Are they able to use the power of discovery? Can they subpoena documents? Is that because they got a lot of internal emails?
Yeah, they released a lot of documents at the beginning of the hearing so that they could discuss a lot of emails and other things that were, I don't know, totally new.
For instance, emails that said the internal Facebook emails that said, oh, we're really worried about Instagram. It's a real threat. Right before they bought it, confirming what everyone knows, which is that they bought it as a defensive action. Jamie Raskin got Bezos to admit Amazon Alexas are priced below market.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I always assumed that Amazon probably figured we'll make it up in the transactions that'll go through us as a result. Same thing with the Fire tablets. But I guess it's the problem is from an antitrust point of view, how do you compete with something that's priced below the cost to make it?
They also proved in the hearing that Amazon actually ranks its products up in Alexa above other products that are offered.
Again, something everybody who's used it knew, but it's good to get confirmation it wasn't just your instinct.
Right.
They accused Amazon, actually this was the pop socket guy, and they brought this up, who accused Amazon of making duplicate products to his until he ponied up $2 million in ad buys. And then mysteriously, the Amazon version of the pop sockets disappeared. Jeff Bezos said, well, I don't know anything about that. If we did that, was wrong.
Whoops.
Actually,
I will say one thing that I found astounding, very interesting about this hearing is that it showed, strangely, that Mark Zuckerberg has been through a lot of these. He understood kind of how to play it.
Yeah.
He understood how to phrase his answers and respond in situations where he wasn't quite sure versus, say, Bezos, who has never been in this position before, floundered a lot.
Yeah.
I also, maybe this is just me, but I'm looking at the kind of message that's sent by the way by the backdrops these executives had, the way they were shot. Bezos, for instance, and My Skype Room picked this up on Twitter. He said, get a ring light, Jeff. You've got them on sale right now at Amazon.com. Jeff was, and I think this was quite intentional. He was so poorly lit that he kind of blended into the background. And I think the intent was really to make him almost disappear. He's managed to avoid these testimony up to now. It's just kind of and that's, in a way, that's in a nutshell, Jeff Bezos' way of handling all this. Is he doesn't give interviews, he doesn't testify, he just sits in the back, but he's definitely the puppet master. There's no question about that. He's pulling the strings. There will be, so the upshot of this this is a big showpiece, and members of Congress used it to grandstand, But there was a point, and the point is there will be a report from the subcommittee, a final report, which will probably not come out before the election. 6 hearings, 385 hours of calls and meetings, and most importantly, 1.3 million documents from these companies. Lots of legwork done before this testimony. And I think the point of this report is, well, here's what we think should happen. Things like, I don't know what's on the table, maybe that Facebook should be required to divest Instagram and WhatsApp. That I'm almost certain will be one of the things they'll talk about. They did talk to Sundar Pichai, CEO of Alphabet, and by extension Google, over a Google email saying some websites were getting too much traffic. Yeah. Did you get that email, Matt?
I don't recall getting that email. It's interesting because, like, I was there when the search team was like 8 people around a ping pong table, and I always saw people acting with a lot of integrity and trying to make sure that the results were fair, they were nonpartisan. If somebody types in X, they get information or an answer about X. But I haven't seen that email. I'm wondering whether, it's also the case that if like 8 out of the top 10 results are one site, then somebody could send an email that's like, oh, this site is dominating the search results in a way that's unfair, and then the shorthand might be this site is getting too much traffic. But I've personally seen where investigators can ask questions about things that to a search engineer, you're like, oh, these results are interesting. And then they're like, are they interesting because you are squashing a competitor? And they're like, no, they're interesting because it's actually got more French results than we would have expected,
right,
given that there aren't that many French queries, that sort of thing.
That's what makes this so difficult. Just the phrase "getting too much traffic" it's not a smoking gun. Now the imputation is this site was getting more traffic than our own sites, but it could absolutely just be a failure of the algorithms putting this result up more than it ought to. Pichai's response was, Congressman, just like other businesses, we try to understand trends from data, which we can see, and we can use it to improve our products for users. That was, by the way, the drumbeat from all of them, but especially for Sundar Pichai, is we want to improve our products for users. I have to say, at the beginning, when all 4 gave their statements, I wanted to stand up and wave the flag. I wanted to say, yeah, God bless them. This is the engine of the American economy. This is what's moving us forward. This is where innovation is happening, that these companies are doing their best to make the best possible product. As Tim Cook said, I guess it's true, we aren't dominant in any field that we participate in. We are not even close to dominant. We just try to make the best products for users. And I think to some degree, to take the opposite side from you, Brianna, that's what these companies do. And I don't think they should be punished for doing it well.
Well, I would actually agree. I thought Tim Cook, I think if you wanted to rank who got master blasted in this hearing, I think Amazon would be number 1. Facebook would be number 2. I thought Google and Apple got off relatively unscathed.
I did hardly talk to Tim, actually.
Yeah, I listened to most of the hearing while I was working. And, the biggest moment with Tim Cook was him being asked about cancel culture for some asinine reason. So I found Apple's answers generally compelling on this, as well as Google's. So I think I agree with you, Leo.
There'd be a risk for Congress to be too aggressive in this because, especially now, during COVID, we are really reliant on technology companies.
Yeah.
Is it the case, do you think, maybe I'll ask Paris this, is it the case that these companies are so big that we don't see the innovative ferment we used to see? I heard one of my colleagues say in the early days, there'd be hundreds of different products from hundreds of different companies. There was one huge dominant player. We had so much to cover. Now it's really, we cover Google, Amazon, Facebook, and Apple, Do you feel like that's true, Paris? Is that fair?
I mean, I feel like from a coverage perspective, yes, just because it is.
They're so dominant.
There are so many. They're so large. Each of them are a world in and of themselves, essentially. And there is a lot to cover within each company, much less all of them combined. I mean, do I think that translates directly to whether or not these companies are monopolies? I it's not my position to say, but I think it's interesting and perhaps not the right framework to apply here when you're thinking about like a coverage perspective. I think that a coverage perspective is always going to be focused on like the biggest players in the room, because there just isn't enough energy out there, much less funding in media or even just from users to have your eyes on everything. But I think that also when you have companies that do get so large and do affect so many people, that warrants criticism and warrants a careful eye.
That's exactly what David Cicciolini, who's the chair, said. He said, because these companies are so central in our modern life, this was in his opening, their business practices and decisions have an outsized effect on our economy and democracy. Any single action by any one of these companies can affect hundreds of millions of us in profound and lasting ways. Absolutely. Nobody denies that. It's why we cover them. We cover because they change our lives. That's not inherently bad.
Yeah.
What do you think, Matt? I mean, you have the best perspective on Google, having worked there. And I would agree with you. Everybody I ever met from Google had, just like Tim Cook, had the interest in making the best product they could.
Yeah, I think that's true. I also think way back, the first like FTC investigation, like 2011 or whatever, the thing that Google would say is, we understand that with size comes scrutiny. And I think given the size of all these companies, it is perfectly appropriate to scrutinize them. And at the same time, it was interesting to see how, if you think about like an earlier Zuckerberg hearing, the questions were not on point, as seen by Paris's hat, for example. and the questions, like you could tell a bunch of research happened. And for me, one of the most interesting things is, how do you get like the idea of lawmakers passing laws to regulate technology when they might not perfectly understand some of the issues involved is a little bit scary. And so there's some interesting areas. There's this thing called Tech Congress, for example. They've got fellowship applications opening for the next 3 weeks. So they bring in technologists, computer scientists, engineers, and they sit in the offices of like important members of Congress to help make sure that people understand technology and you can ask the right questions or you can get to the issues that matter. And I think getting more technologists talking to DC and vice versa is probably good for both worlds.
Cicciolini was kind of a bulldog, and he bared down on this Google issue. And this is the one I really want to ask you about, Matt. The claim is that Google favors its own content over other sites' content. Cicciolini put it in, I think, a very nasty way. He said, why does Google steal content from honest businesses? And he was pointing at Yelp, which maybe not the most honest business I've ever heard of.
I think honest business is an oxymoron generally, but
they're all trying to. And Yelp, let's face it, a lot of this scrutiny comes from Google competitors who are unhappy with Google's success, and whether in the EU or here, and Yelp's a good example, go, hey guys, you really ought to look into this. This is something terrible. But it is the case that when you do a Google search, and Pichai said this is particularly in commerce, when you're looking to buy a product, that Google's going to surface shopping information. There's a lot of knowledge cards now. Used to be Google search results was just search results. Now there's the knowledge card, and there's a lot more stuff. And a lot of it does have YouTube videos, Google shopping. Google's excuse is we're trying to give people the information they're looking for. We're trying to answer their question. Right, Matt?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And I think the people in the search team still believe that. They've internalized that. And I also think there's tension, which is well-deserved, because as Google moves up the value chain of delivering better and better answers, there are some sites, from my old world with SEO hat on, where, people would feel like you're taking a snippet from my site, and that's the thing that people really want to know, like how high is this celebrity?
So they never go to the site because they got the information. That's a legit complaint.
It's a legit complaint, and it's a valid concern on both sides. Like, well, okay, if you really, all you needed to know was, how high Tom Cruise was,
right?
Then, maybe they're not going to stay on your site.
Do you mean how high or how tall?
How tall? Sorry. He can be as high as he wants. He doesn't need to be tall. But then the flip side is, the other day I was invoking my Google device and I was like, tell me how to spell loquacious. And it just spells it right out. It doesn't point me to another website. So,
but that's what you want as the user. Yeah. That's what you want.
Yeah.
So I do have to say, as someone that watched most of this hearing, we're not just talking about things that show up in Google site results. Like some of the most explosive moments we're talking about for Google's own lyrics that show up on Android. And they had one particular company that put that out there. They actually put fake records in their lyrics. And
we
Google was caught red.
Yeah,
exactly. Google was caught using that. So this isn't.
Well, but Google. Okay, so this is more complicated because Google said, "Well, we didn't scrape it from Rap Genius. We hired a company that scraped it from Rap Genius."
Yeah. Okay.
So it's not our fault; it's that company's fault. And I think, at least in Google's defense, they stopped doing that, but they did get caught red-handed.
Sure. Yeah. I'm just saying. I think it's a wider pattern of behavior that I think could be construed as anti-competitive. And in my opinion, if you're using a third-party person and they're doing something that blatant, I think your company should face sanctions in that case. So that's my opinion.
The problem is it's just so hard to figure it out. I mean, I think it's a good defense. Well, we're just trying to give people the answer that they expect.
Another thing that came up at the hearing, which is based on article written by a couple of my colleagues, The Information, is kind of the accusations that Google has used its Android platform and the amount of information it can kind of collect on how users using Android use apps in order to do research for its own applications. I think the situation that that my colleagues discussed in their article was in preparation for launching Google's own possible TikTok competitor. They pulled data from Android about how people use TikTok on Android devices, which seems kind of like a conflict of interest there.
It's a jerky move, if true. So,
yeah, but and Amazon's accused of using retail data to figure out what products it should make. Mm-hmm. But I think every business in the world would does that, right? We're trying to figure. I guess Amazon has a unique access to data that it wouldn't normally have. Is that why it's wrong?
I mean, part of the issue is that if you listen to the complaints of small first-party sellers or third-party sellers on Amazon, they say, "Oh, I have been making this unicorn-themed hairbrush for 10 years. Everybody loves my unicorn hairbrush. It's been doing so well." Then all of a sudden I see Amazon brand unicorn hairbrush appears top of the search results, is the Amazon choice, and nobody buys my unicorn hairbrush anymore.
That's a good complaint.
In situations like that, it seems, I don't know, to be a fairly concerning practice of true.
This is the same problem I have with Google owning YouTube and Amazon selling stuff, is it mixes the two things together. If Google were just a search engine, it wouldn't be so much of a problem, except that it controls one of the number one deliverer of video content. So that kind of muddles the matter. Amazon, if it's going to do what it's due, shouldn't also be in the business of making these products because they have an unusual amount of information. I mean, face it, I bought this hygiene hand on Kickstarter, which shows that I'm an idiot because I paid too much for it.
Oh, I've gotten so many Instagram ads for that thing.
Same.
But the point is, the minute that this went on Kickstarter, 800 Chinese companies made an exact clone of it and sold it for a tenth the price.
Yeah.
So all my friends have cheap ones. I have the fancy one. It's just a piece of metal that you poke stuff with. It shouldn't be expensive. But the point is, they didn't need Amazon data to do that. That happens all the time.
Yeah.
I bought. Well, don't judge me, but I bought LED light up eyelashes.
Okay, please back up. What's the context for this purchase?
Yeah.
I don't know.
And what was the URL for that?
It was and Matt understands. It was called the F-Lash interactive LED eyelash.
Do you have a video recording of you wearing them?
Yeah, no. Well, I ordered them, and this was another Kickstarter. I have a problem with Kickstarter. As soon as it went on Kickstarter, this poor guy, Vietnamese guy, got undercut by 100 Chinese companies selling. I mean, they said, "Well, we can do that. There's nothing special about that."
Oh my God.
And so as a result, I didn't get my F-lashes for months, but everybody else at the party had them. So I feel...
Your lashes feel dark and unilluminated.
Yeah.
Wow.
I didn't even wear them. I thought, screw this. It's not special anymore.
I tell you, you got everything you need for your own TikTok channel. I'm telling you.
You're ready.
You got the
You're ready, man.
lashes.
Yeah. You should be just posting content of you unboxing all of your crazy Kickstarter.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
3 months after it's been on the market for half the price.
In front of your Black Hawk helicopter.
Yeah. Oh, man. If I bought that, I probably would be a TikTok star for a moment or two. That'd be good. Just do that quick.
I get your point. I really do.
It's complicated.
It is complicated, and in this particular case, my husband does patent law, and I would, if someone were coming to me with this particular business plan, I would say, what you have in front of you is not novel in a way that it can be patented according to our laws, and you should understand that this is a business threat. That's reasonable. I do think that's a slightly different situation than a company abusing their data to undercut competitors and threaten other companies, which is what came out in this hearing. So I think I really agree with you, Matt. The way forward is these are big companies. They deserve scrutiny. And I think you can never say often enough, you know who wasn't at this hearing today? It's Microsoft. We brought that case against them in the 90s, and they have been a pretty ethical company, generally speaking, in the 2 decades since. 3 decades now, I guess, 2.5.
So you would submit that the DOJ prosecution of Microsoft in the 90s was successful in that regard?
What I've heard from my friends that work at Microsoft over and over and over again is that fundamentally changed the culture.
Interesting.
And that there was more of an anything goes approach before then. And then they finally had a conversation where it had to go through legal. They had to have discussions if it was going to open them up to liability. So my opinion is this is all checks and balances, right? If not talking about Trump, but a generic president were to do something that was over the line, Congress checks them. That doesn't necessarily mean the presidency itself is corrupt. It's just a system meant to check each other.
Good point.
I think until we see stronger antitrust actions against tech companies, I think they're going to feel free to just keep pushing the line harder and harder. So I strongly support this line of investigation.